Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
Have you heard Suckingham Phallus?
What?
Instead of Buckingham.
Oh, Suckingham Phallus.
Every time I see it, I crack up. Anyway, the Queen's dead. Oh, to be in an Irish pub right now.
I know. Emily texted me after we were exchanging some tweets or whatever, and she was just like, I'm so happy for the Irish. I was like, yeah, that's the right sentiment. That's what they deserve.
Yeah, if you're Irish, congratulations.
Tybalt.
If you're in the UK, then I hope you riot when they try and spend $1 million on her funeral. Don't let them use your money that way.
Yeah, $1 million feels low.
Tax $1 billion.
Yeah.
For whatever. For a lady who did nothing.
Who really didn't do anything except enable atrocities and theft. Could you be normal for 5 seconds?
If you're like, wow, a surprising amount of anti-monarchial vitriol coming from hit podcast Everybody Hates Rand, only a minute and a half in, then where have you been the last 200 episodes? Because I would not be happier unless it was the Queen of Andor herself, Elaine, who had died.
Yeah.
And I do think there are parallels between Elaine and the Royal House of Andor and the Royal House of England. Tybalt, my God.
It's time to be a normal boy. It's time to be a normal boy.
He can't.
He just did a full barrel roll in my arms to escape my clutches.
Do we need to open the window for you?
You just want to see the motorcycles go by? Anyway, Queen is dead.
Yeah, that's the big news.
Hallelujah.
When you're listening to this, it will have been several days, so sorry that you're no longer living in the blissful afternoon hours of September 8th.
Yeah.
Or whenever you heard the news, because time zones. But that's where we were when it happened.
Yeah, Twitter's been pretty funny today, so
yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
But no, we're here to talk about Crossroads of Twilight. Every day it gets more exhausting. Goodbye, Tybalt. Go attack Ed or whatever. This is hit podcast Everybody Hates Rand. Your friendly... neighborhood Wheel of Time, your friendly neighborhood hit Wheel of Time podcast. I did that wrong. I'm not gonna fix it though.
That's fine. We're massaging the slogan.
Yeah. We're working on it.
Did you say your name?
No. I'm Emily Jushaw.
I'm Sally Goodger. It's been a day, you guys.
It's sure been a day. I don't know how long this will be, because boy, was it some not very exciting chapters. We're just still with Egg. And you guys, Egg chapters are kind of boring sometimes. Especially when they're, about the politics of the Hall of the Tower. Mm-hmm. Which aren't done particularly well, I would say. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to express why that is, except for, the usual layer of Robert Jordan's misogyny. It's clear as he's writing about an all-female government body that he doesn't believe that government bodies should be made up of only women.
Right.
That sort of disdain leaks through. Mm-hmm. And there are many political fantasies that are done very well, but this is not one of them. Also because it's one of 18 different subplots that's going on right now just in this character's point of view. So
right.
Political, I think fantasies tend to work best when we are fully immersed in them. Mm-hmm. not just sort of flitting back and forth between them, because of course it's impossible to keep track of more than, I would say, 3 or 4 of the players in the Hall of the Tower. All I've got is Ramonda, Lelaine, Delana,
Yeah.
and Shiriam, I guess. That's
Yeah,
it. None of the others mean anything to me.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Emily. I always say that I don't care for political fantasy. I like that. That's a nice little term. I would say that I don't care for it. And I usually don't. Like, I usually don't like being steeped in politics to that extent. But I think of, like, we've referenced this book before, The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which is a deep, like, it is very high fantasy TM and also very, like, political fantasy TM. Mm-hmm. And it's one of my favorite books in the world. It's, like, so lovely and so interesting, and I care very deeply about everything that's happening. And one, I think part of that is just the writing. It's such a lovely book. But you make a really good point about being in, like, one court in particular and the ability to actually understand all of the plots that are happening, because though there might be multiple plots happening at court, they're all, of course, connected. We're living in the same spider web. But Wheel of Time is asking us to do, and Game of Thrones does a similar thing. It asks us to exist simultaneously in, like, 18 different spider webbing plots. And there's just no way the human brain, at least some people are much smarter than me, there's no way my human brain can keep track of all of that.
Yeah,
Like,
I think some people like feeling challenged in a way to understand, but I find it a little bit exhausting.
Yeah, and I also think, from my experience, when I read these types of political fantasies and I can't keep track of everything, I feel like people's response is then to tell me that I'm not smart enough to engage with the series. And I feel like to a certain extent, the genre likes making, this particular genre of political fantasy likes making people feel stupid.
Yeah, it's a sort of, like, intrinsic level of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Like, I am not allowing you to engage with this on the level that I, the author, am writing into it unless you are, like, doing homework.
Right.
And, like, studying your notes every night. Right. Or unless you just have the sort of brain that functions that way automatically, which I think is a pretty low percentage of the population.
Right.
Most people, I would imagine, most people who were, like, reading the Wheel of Time series as the books came out probably weren't conducting full rereads of the series every time a book came out, because otherwise you'd be doing nothing but reading Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
So, like, that sort of expectation is, yeah, like, sort of condescending in a way, and also just, like, unrealistic. Like, you guys, you need to write to where your audience is, and if you refuse to do that, then you can't be mad when your audience is like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know who killed Asmodean. What are you talking about, Robert Jordan? It's not actually obvious.
Yeah, because it's not in the text, Robert Jordan.
Yeah.
And there's no normal-sized hints in the text. Just say, I forgot to write it.
Yeah, and I feel like this leads to two interconnected but kind of like opposite ends of the spectrum experience, where these authors sort of coming from this place on high that they are smarter than their readers, and their readers need to exercise a certain level of intellect or study in order to engage with the text. It's either the I killed Asmodean scenario where you're like, I have literally no idea what the fuck you're talking about, because you're just like, oh, it's so obvious, everyone will know. And it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or B, on the other end of it, you're like, my audience is so stupid, I'm going to spoon feed them a bunch of information that they don't actually need. Like, I don't actually need to know the names of so many Aes Sedai in the Hall of the Tower. I don't actually need to know all of these subplots in order to understand the general arc of the siege on Tarvalon, you know?
Yeah, Robert Jordan had a really tough time, like, figuring out the level of information to give, which I think is sort of the hallmark of the Wheel of Time series. Did not understand that we don't need to know what every woman is wearing. That's sort of like the comparison that everyone goes to. But furthermore, like, when you peel back the layers, literally, of the dresses, I don't need to know distinguishing features of every woman.
Yeah.
I don't need to know every woman's name. I don't need to know this many people's, like, characters, because this many characters are not necessary.
Yes.
So, like, I think I'm operating at a normal baseline, is what I'm saying, that I only know Ramonda, Lelaine, and, like, 2 other sitters by name, and the fact that he's just, like, throwing us in there with everyone talking about, like, well, so-and-so has this vendetta, and so-and-so wants this and this, and maybe there's some sort of weird conspiracy where some of the sitters are younger, and that's happening in both halls of the tower, and that's significant somehow, and I'm just like, is it, though?
No.
Because you can't just keep saying, here's the facts, they are significant, and keep saying that until someone reaches the conclusion.
Right.
That apparently you want us to reach. That's no way to do a mystery.
Right. Like, I think you're right. You are operating at the normal baseline of being like 4 main players, 4 or 5 main players, depending on how much you want to count, like Egg and Swan and Lelaine as their or Leanne as their own faction, or like individual players. That's actually, like, a completely normal amount of characters. Like, epic fantasy has really conditioned us that there needs to be hundreds of players on the board, when really, like, a strong narrative can be made with a handful. With 2, really, if you want to get down to it. But, like, if we have Ramonda's faction, and maybe we know a few of her underlings, Lane's faction, you know a few of her underlings, and then Egg, I'd be like, yeah, I've got it. I understand these currents of power, more or less.
Yeah, Robert Jordan and George R. Martin are going to this school of, like, I must make fantasy as photorealistic as possible when it comes to comparing it to history. Because history is full of inconvenient characters and people who mostly don't really matter but come up in weird ways.
Right.
Da-da-da-da-da. But, like, the difference between history and fantasy is that fantasy you can build.
Yeah.
To make it for someone's consumption.
Yeah.
You don't have to consume history in that way. If you do consume history, then you're a historian or a student, and you have diagrams with you.
Yeah, and also, like, I think it is really, I mean, you're much more of a historian than I, so you can correct me, but, like, it's also very, idealistic to say that history is not in and of itself a narrative with certain key players highlighted for various reasons.
Sure.
You know, so, like, and you're right. If you are giving, like, an actual historical account of the War of the Roses, to pull as an example, since we're talking about Game of Thrones, yeah, you are going to mention minor players because they did contribute to the web.
But, like, you can pull a Shakespeare and combine minor roles, do things like that. And Shakespeare, don't get me wrong, his War of the Roses plays are still very confusing unless you are operating on a baseline contextual level of the War of the Roses.
Yeah.
But, like, he made it into a narrative, so it's possible.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, and I don't want to always come back to this, like, level of male intellectual elitism, but I do feel like that's what a lot of this comes from. Like, gatekeeping is, I think, not an inherently masculine trait, but I think it comes from a lot of masculine ideas. I shouldn't say the word masculine because that is kind of a nonsense thing, but I feel like men are more likely to gatekeep. It's men who are much more likely to tell me that I am stupid for not following the plot of Game of Thrones, and not a single woman has ever said that to me, but multiple men have said that to me. And it's just like, why are you writing in this way? History doesn't, you're right. It doesn't need to be photorealistic. I don't know. It's just frustrating to be in this space that feels like, it just reminds me very obviously that I'm reading something written by a man.
Yeah, well, and I think it's, like, fair to say that we are seeing hallmarks of the quote-unquote late 90s, early 2000s nerd culture that became so pervasive and that shared so many of these traits, like gatekeeping, like misogyny, everything else. Like, those, they didn't come out of a vacuum, the eponymous nerds of nerd culture. They came from somewhere, and they were nurtured by people like Robert Jordan and George R. Martin, intentionally or not.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, the idea of lore, and this is, we keep saying George R. Martin and Robert Jordan as if Jert himself is not perhaps...
Yeah, sure, this
ultimately ultimately responsible for a lot of this.
Sure, you threw in Tom Bombadil knowing full well I would have no idea what the fuck you were talking
Like,
about.
what were you doing? Like, coming out of the Tolkienian tradition, Tolkien is not the beginning of this, but keeping with this sort of arc of big fantasy authors, like, the idea of lore in and of itself just allows you to gatekeep. And, like, it allows people who feel like they don't have a lot of other cultural cachet to be like, oh, I can lord this above you, you know, in a way that is extremely insufferable. So books like The Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, all of those types of things, they just lend themselves to being this really toxic nerd culture gatekeeping thing. Just as like a counter example to this, The Prior of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, I didn't care for this book for a lot of reasons that are mostly like personal taste. But it is in the similar genre of like very big epic fantasy that plays a lot on like court drama, but it does it with relatively few players, so to speak.
Yeah, I read that book when the pandemic started, so 2.5 years ago or so. And, like, Sally was reading it, and I was like, I don't remember anything about that book. But that's not precisely true. I don't remember, like, names of places or names of people, but I do remember generally, like, okay, there was a player who was, like, the queen character, there was her bodyguard, who was also doing this stuff with the mystical priory, there was the dragon rider over on the other continent, there was that dude and his, like, not boyfriend who got killed immediately, spoiler alert. Rip to that guy.
Yeah, I don't remember his name, but R.I.P.
There was dragon, I did remember things, and, like, I also felt like that was a book that did pretty well in being like, there is a history and a lore here, and it's a dense mythology, but you're never going to be left feeling stupid for not understanding it.
And yeah, totally. No, I totally agree. It's a book that also, like, goes out of its way to teach you the mythology. It does it in a lot of tropey ways, but it's not necessarily bad, like the tropes exist, like the trope of telling a story to someone in the oral tradition is not a bad one. Like, that's how we dispense information as humans. But you're so right, like, it's three distinct plots that are easy to remember, and at each of those places there's a lot of people because they're populated places, but you never have to remember really more than like 5 names and 5 players. And it's able to exist in this tradition of epic fantasy with very deep mythology and these very complicated plots without being like, you're actually a dumb piece of shit if you don't remember the Duke of X's cousin's son's nephew's husband. And it's like, well, at least there's a queer character in there, I guess.
And at least someone's gay.
At least someone's gay.
At least there are a relatively normal amount of characters of color. Like,
yeah.
You
It's
know.
like, come on.
Fantasy's doing better, I think, is what we're
I think it's doing
saying.
better, and I think,
But fantasy is burdened. Fantasy as a genre is more or less carrying the dead albatross that is these generations of gatekeeping and misogyny.
And just like the literal heaviness of the page count of the genre itself, I think is something fantasy is trying to break away from.
Yeah.
I think people realizing that books can actually just be 350 pages long was like a revelation for fantasy writers in the 2010s. I think they were like, oh, wait, actually, if my book is only like 400 pages, that still might be a little too long. Okay, that's my little, like, tirade about how male fantasy authors make me feel dumb.
Here's what's going on. Egg goes back to her tent to find Swan and Halima arguing. Halima is, like, literally lounging on her side on, like, a pile of pillows, and Egg's like, sorry, I need to actually do some work. And Halima's like, how dare you, and storms off after making eye contact with Egg and Egg immediately getting a headache. So again, we have the unfortunate reality that Halima is very obviously, like, evil and doing
Yeah.
something to Egg's brain. And no one else seemingly is realizing it.
Yeah, everyone's too busy being like, Halima is such a whore.
Yeah, actually, my big takeaway from it these days was that perhaps Robert Jordan's overall thesis is that, like, feminism allows evil women to sneak in. Or worse, trans women. Like, because legitimately,
Yeah.
Egg is like, I let Halima be here because I like her. Because I like that she is outspoken.
Yeah.
I like that she is not appropriate necessarily.
Right.
And I even like, to a certain extent, that she's like this slutty, like, gives no shits
Yeah.
person that everyone else finds so offensive.
Right.
And it's like, whether Edwin liking that persona or not is real, because there's always the question of how much compulsion she is under.
Right.
It is still telling us that, like, Edwin is doing this feminist thing of accepting women however
Yeah.
they are, however they behave, however sexually loose they may be.
Right.
But by doing that, she's letting a snake into her bosom, you know?
Yeah, if she would only uphold the morals of a good, chaste woman.
If only Egg would behave like a good Christian woman
Yeah.
who massages her KKK husband's feet every night and fucking licks cops' boots, then
Yeah.
everything would be fine and she wouldn't get headaches. Sorry.
No, I mean, listen, Robert Jordan's really telling on himself in these chapters, so
So annoying.
we're just making it clear to you.
Anyway, so Egg's like, oh my god, I have a headache, and Swan's like, blah, 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 blah. Swan's just doing her usual thing of ranting and raving and not making any sense about anything. But basically, Swan's like, they're doing this report that doesn't really matter. Swan again brings up the idea that there are sitters who are too young in both halls of the tower, and she thinks that this means something. And Egg is like, great, find out what it means. Mm-hmm. And maybe she will one day, but
Not yet.
Not in my recollection. And their meeting is interrupted eventually by some of the Aes Sedai, some of the, like, members of Edwin's little coterie of 6 coming up and being like, oh, those ladies who we sent to scout the giant beacon of power a few days ago have come back, so they've called for the Hall of the Tower to sit, which I don't even think we referenced in the last episode, that several Aes Sedai, on a volunteer basis it seemed, were sent to investigate the beacon, and that everyone sort of suspected it was the Forsaken, so they were all
Right.
too freaked out to really go for it.
Yeah, imagine being one of the people who did volunteer. Like, who's the
think they're interesting. Junkie.
focused Aes Sedai who's like, I will go confront the big hole in the ground.
The big hole. Well, as we find out from the women who give their report, most of these women were either volunteered or chosen because they have this ability to read resonances of the power.
Right. That's right. I remember.
And we're not really told what that means, except, you know, based on context. None of our main characters, as far as I know, really have that ability.
Right.
But it seems like that they are able to sort of see the weaves that were there.
Right.
And of course, those weaves were more or less meaningless to them because the weave to cleanse Sidon wasn't something that ever existed before.
Right.
But Edwin is, like, listening to all these, like, everyone's just sort of talking about before she goes to the hall because she has to have Shiriam, her keeper, announce her, and Swan runs off to fetch Shiriam. So while they're waiting for Shiriam, everyone's just kind of arguing about, like, oh, well, what could be going on, like, not just with the hole in the ground, but also, like, these proposed negotiations with Leda. What could those people be up to, the ones who are talking about that? What's this chick named Moira up to? Because apparently she's up to something. I don't really remember that being brought up, but okay. And finally, after Shiriam not showing up for 10 minutes, Egg's like, let's just go over there. Maybe she's going to meet us there. So they go over as the Hall of the Tower is meeting. We get a lot of lady descriptions. Eventually, Shiriam shows up, breathless and mildly hysterical, which these days is sort of Shiriam's baseline.
No, it's...
And the Hall of the Tower convenes. It's an open session, which means that every Aes Sedai can watch, if not participate. Mm-hmm. And they get this report out of the way immediately, and all that happens is the 6 women who went are like, okay, well, we went, and what we found is a big hole in the ground, approximately, 3 miles wide and 1.5 miles deep.
Yeah.
1.5 miles deep is incredibly deep.
It's so deep.
I don't think
big hole.
Yeah, I don't think we're really talking about that. That's like the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Fucking Kennecott copper mine just in the middle of Shadar Logoth.
Yeah, and they're like, and this is the location that Shadar Logoth was.
Yeah.
And we don't know what happened there or what's going on. Da-da-da-da-da. And that's all their report is. Basically, we went, tons of Sidon was used, more Sidon than Sidar, but also a huge amount of Sidar, and Shadar Logoth is gone, and now there's just this hole. So, this is annoying because as a person who enjoys sort of mystery novels and detective type work, I feel like they should have been able to do more if this ability to read the resonances is significant. For example, if they'd gone to the origin point where Rand and Nynaeve were sitting and fanned out from there, then they would have very quickly found evidence of people fighting one another, both with Sidon and Sidar, with more recognizable weaves.
Yeah, and there should also be some dead bodies unless people cleaned up everything.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the only dead body that would have been left would have been Dashiva's.
That's right.
And he got super blown up, so maybe not a lot of him left.
You right.
But there should be scorch marks, you know? Blood, maybe.
Blood.
So they should have been able to do more. But it suits Robert Jordan that they're left in this state of confusion. And it suits the members of the Hall of the Tower who want to use this big event that no one knows what it was, what happened. But for some reason, and I don't know if this is weird to me, they have all assumed it was the Forsaken. Mm-hmm. And there has been no debate that we have seen that maybe it wasn't the Forsaken.
Right.
Despite the fact that, Rand is also sort of a very obvious maybe.
Yeah, it's very frustrating to me that Rand is, apparently never on the table.
Yeah, especially because he's been missing.
Right.
And also, even if he's not communicating with Egg, Elaine and Avienda know where he is always, and Egg is in communication with them. So... yeah. There should be, the Aes Sedai should not be totally in the dark about this.
Yeah, I think it is in this chapter following, because I was just skimming my blogs really quick, that Avienda, they, talk in Chelaron Riad or whatever, and Avienda, deliberately chooses not to tell Egg that it's Rand for some reason, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's why? Just tell her.
The lack of communication in the later books of The Wheel of Time is something that readers often point out as being very frustrating.
Yeah.
Alongside the really delayed plot points of, for example, the Siege of Tar-Valon, Perrin rescuing Fael, etc., etc. And they're right, the lack of communication is really annoying because Robert Jordan does not give us any clear reasons why it's happening.
Right.
It's not like he can even say, this is happening along a gender binary where men are not communicating with women.
Right.
This is, in this case, just women not communicating with women.
Yeah.
And God knows Rand isn't communicating with anyone else. Yeah. Perrin, Matt, anyone. Mm-hmm. So it's not even serving Robert Jordan's project, really. It's just sort of his conceit in order to keep the plot secret from characters, which is very annoying to readers because at a certain point you stretch our suspension of disbelief to the breaking point. We no longer believe that these characters are that stupid because you've been spending 8 books telling us that they're smart, actually.
Yeah.
So anyway, everyone's this was definitely the Forsaken, and the Forsaken were definitely using some sort of nuke or whatever. The A-bomb, the fucking A-bomb on Shadar Logoth. And Ramonda's well, who gives a shit? It's Shadar Logoth. Good riddance.
Which is a pretty funny response, I think.
I know, and also no one's so the Forsaken got rid of Shadar Lagoth,
Yeah,
like the evilest
why?
city? Why? What are they trying to clean up the world before they take over? What's the point,
Yeah.
But this comes down to a few women are like, have manufactured this to be like, okay, well, if the Forsaken have this much power and can do this level of damage, then we need to up our game in being able to fight them. Because, like, look at us. We have all these contingency plans if we're ever attacked that involve linking up with each other, but we are not as strong as whatever happened here. And it's like, yeah, no one is as strong as what happened there. Because they were using the two biggest Cyangreal, Terangreal of all time.
Yeah.
And you were also using two of the most powerful channelers of all time.
Yeah.
Like, these are not, like, fair...
Yeah, it's not...
logical leaps.
Yeah, it's like me being like, damn, I'm not as good of a basketball player as LeBron James.
Yeah, no, I don't expect you to be. Like,
it's like, so I should do something about it. It's like, no, I don't need to do anything about it.
yeah, we're not going to start going to summer camp now.
Yeah. Like, we do not exist on the same scale.
Yeah.
And that's fun. Like, it doesn't... the comparisons mean nothing.
If I'm ever called upon to, like, be in a competition with LeBron James, I'm going to try and ensure that it's not basketball. Like, maybe it'll be something we're equally good at, like chess. I don't know. Maybe he's really good at chess.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm
I'm not either. So he could probably beat me. Anyone could probably beat me at chess.
Baking?
Baking. It's the Great British Bake Off starring LeBron James and Emily Jusha.
I'd watch that.
Me too.
I bet he's delightful. Stupid.
But it's just like, that's how ridiculous this feels. And even if they're comparing, even if they're not like knowing that it's Rand and Nynaeve featuring the Choden Call, even comparing your
like a fucking rap album.
Featuring the Choden Call. Feat, F-E-A-T, period.
Exactly.
Even trying to like compare yourself to the Forsaken seems a little bit like comparing yourself to a professional athlete.
Yeah.
It's just like, they're 13 of the most powerful channelers in history, given special powers and training by the devil himself. Like, it is also not fair to compare yourself to them. I understand that you need to find a way to fight them, but to just be like...
Wow, so this is finally evidence that we're outclassed. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's been known from the get-go.
Yeah.
In fact.
Yeah, like... It just, like, I do understand them being like, we need to find a way to deal with this, but it's just like, it took this for you to perhaps consider, perhaps we are not able to fight the Forsaken. It's actually not as hard as you think, so...
Oh yeah, they're actually all super bad at everything.
Which is the other thing that's really funny. Like, if they were in communication with Rand, have killed half of the Forsaken, all Thor, he'd be like, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, like, legitimately, just
don't worry about it.
just show up. Nynaeve would be like, oh yeah, I beat Moghedion's ass like 3 times.
Yeah, like, it's not actually that big of a deal.
It's not that hard. They have weaknesses. They're all idiots. That's
all...
the big weakness.
They are all foolish.
Anyway, so the proposed plan is that maybe the Aes Sedai should consider getting into linked circles with the Ashaman. This causes immediate uproar in, as you referred to last week, you know, when we're in Robert Jordan's women governmental bodies space. Women all have to react by fainting, screaming, throwing up. Because women are so emotive, they just can't hold it in. Or their ovaries will explode, killing them instantly.
I actually threw up this morning when I found out the Queen of England was dead. That's how I expressed.
I just started screaming, crying. God. No, tellingly, it is Shiriam who begins having this extreme emotional breakdown. And Shiriam's been kind of like borderline mental breakdown for a little while.
Happening, friend.
But now she's like legit having a breakdown in front of everyone. Delana, also tellingly, also looks upset about this. Right. So Shiriam and Delana, because we've both seen them at this point interacting with the Forsaken, we know that they're both Black Aja, so clearly this is something that the Forsaken themselves will not be pleased by.
Right.
Whether this is because, in general, the Forsaken and the Dark One realize that it's best to keep the various, circles of channeling people separate because they're less powerful that way.
Right.
Or because, God forbid we send more women to Mazrumtem's school for damaged war criminals.
Yeah.
Not Demandred's home base, I mean. Come on.
Yeah, definitely not where Demandred is.
Yeah.
That's how it's labeled on the map.
It's Mazrumtem, parentheses, not Demandred's school for wayward war criminals. Anyway, after some tense argument and explanations, the Hall of the Tower arrives at a consensus that they will move forward with this plan and will approach, at some point, the Ashaman. Similar to this, we know that over in the proper White Tower, Aleda has sent some ladies on a SWAT SEAL Team 6 mission that immediately got fucked over. And pretty soon, Pavara and we'll be getting this in the next few chapters, I believe, at the beginnings of this. The White Tower, Aleda's White Tower, is going to do something equivalent to this. So there's going to be a lot more mingling of Ashman and Aes Sedai. But those are the big plot points, such as they are.
Yeah.
Not terribly significant yet because they don't really have any payoff in this book or the next few books, really.
Yeah.
If you can, say that they have any payoff at all. Really, I just find the whole Aes Sedai Ashaman interactions more confusing and frustrating than they are productive.
Well, yeah, especially at this point in the series, we're 10 books in, and we're still Robert Jordan is still trying to get traction out of the whole, every man who can channel is evil, and that's how the Aes Sedai every man who can channel is dangerous and evil, and, they are dangerous, because Mazrumtem and Rand al'Thor are using them as weapons, but they're not, inherently dangerous or inherently evil, and it's just, ridiculous that Robert Jordan is still trying to get traction from this, even within the Aes Sedai points of view, much like the lack of communication in the series, this, intrinsic world building of, male channelers bad, just doesn't work anymore because we have too many different points of view in which we are seeing the opposite, or we are getting the piece of information so we the reader know it, and it's just kind of exhausting at this point to exist outside what the characters know. I feel like we're just too far in the series for this.
No, yeah, this whole idea has been thoroughly disproven to the readers, so it's more frustrating that the characters can't keep up. That's another reason why lack of communication is frustrating. It's a little I don't know, if you were reading a book about, science from the point of view of someone who is vaccines aren't real.
Right.
You'd be what?
Yeah.
Why am I paying attention to you even?
Yeah.
If you can't keep track of the basics, then why am I supposed to believe that you can keep track of more nuanced things?
Yeah.
So, don't know, besties. It's pretty annoying. Amongst the news that Egg receives in these two chapters are, Eridoman is in shambles. Marana of the Grey Aja has been sighted outside of the palaces of Tyr, so score one for Marana, and also put one in the column for various Aes Sedai from both camps being spotted either doing things for Rand or within company tied to Rand. So outside of the situation, Egg and her camp are becoming aware that okay, whatever happened to the Aes Sedai we sent to Rand and that the White Tower sent to Rand, clearly they're all working for him now. And we don't know why. Compulsion, maybe? But that's happening.
It feels a little ridiculous to me for Egg to be I think my best friend from childhood is brainwashing people. And it's it happens. Sure, we've all been there.
It happened. Lobotomy tent. Varen did
but
that.
But it wasn't Rand. It wasn't Rand. And so it's just this exhausting sort of pointing the finger at Rand for things that Varen did, but not knowing what Rand did. Not actually considering that maybe Rand did the big explosion.
It's just also frustrating that Rand wasn't immediately, this is giving Rand too much credit perhaps, but some of the Aes Sedai should have been okay, Rand, you want to establish a relationship with the Aes Sedai, the larger group of Aes Sedai, that's not going to involve whatever you don't want, which is you bending down to them. You need to allow us to communicate with them and be like, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, we chose this
Right.
on some level, and we're actually making progress, like, da-da-da-da-da. That's the only way things are gonna get done.
Totally. So, it is very
people
silly.
being stupid.
Just, like...
Just a bunch of dummies.
Unbelievable communication. Someone needs to establish an international news network ASAP.
Someone needs to get the fucking Pony Express
wheelie world
going.
Yeah, that can be Olver's first job. Boy loves horses so much.
He does love horses, and he's lightweight or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's that, you guys. Anything else to add?
No, I, as always, have said plenty.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Glenn Mackenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media. Do you have a sign-off?
Yeah, we actually have a listener-submitted sign-off.
Ooh.
Okay, this was submitted to us by Xander. Hi, Xander.
Hi, Xander.
Xander said, I have a listener-submitted sign-off for you that actually features EHR, or I guess Letters to Hosier specifically.
Ooh.
That's our side podcast, in case you don't know. We work very hard on it, so maybe listen to it. As Xander said, so today I was at my desk at work, and generally when I'm sitting at my desk, I'll listen to music or podcasts or whatever. Full disclosure, I normally avoid listening to Everybody Hates Rand at work because it will, make me laugh too much. That's very kind. So today I started listening to your Letters to Hosier side project. So anyway, I was listening to the In a Week letter to Hosier. Emily is talking about the two maidens from Pompeii and how it was recently discovered that the two maidens were both men. And Emily said, instead of the two maidens, are they now the two bros? I thought this line was pretty funny, but probably would have just chuckled to myself and moved on. However, immediately after Emily introduces the ideas of the two bros, the letter switches to Sally's narration where Sally states, the stomach acid of vultures are incredibly corrosive. This is the most distilled distinction of our two personalities that
I did that on purpose for the record.
You could have picked out. It was really good editing on your part. So for some reason, the humor of Emily's line and the abrupt transition to Sally's bird facts, that should be my new gig, Sally's bird facts, really tickled me and caused me to laugh rather loudly at my desk for a few seconds. My coworkers looked over and asked what I was listening to that was so funny. They weren't annoyed. I think they were just wondering because I'm normally pretty reserved and professional at work. However, I wasn't sure how to respond to the coworker's question because it was really the contrast between Emily and Sally's subject matters that made me laugh, and I didn't want to try to explain I was listening to something about both corpses from Pompeii and vulture stomach acid, and explaining the two maidens as the two bros also seemed like too much. So in a momentary panic, I said I was listening to a podcast about vulture digestion, which is a great cover, and I would listen to that podcast.
And you were laughing.
Yeah, and you were like, ha ha ha. So that's the thing here. Unfortunately, my coworkers were all curious about which aspects of vulture digestion were so amusing. Unsure of what to say, I simply repeated Sally's line of the stomach acid of vultures is incredibly corrosive. On its own, this line is definitely not that funny. And all my coworkers were looking pretty weird, probably wondering if I was okay. I wound up just saying the host of this hypothetical vulture digestion podcast were really funny, and I had laughed because of how the fact was presented. I think they could tell that I was trying to cover up what I was listening to, but none of them pressed me. Fortunately, none of my coworkers asked for the name of this vulture podcast because I don't know what I would have told them.
Vulture.
Vulture. Vulture culture.
Vulture culture. That's a good one.
I know. I
just came up with that off the dome.
Welcome to Sally's side podcast. Vulture culture.
Well, just so you know, Xander, I spliced the letters together, and I did think that would be the funniest place to put
I'm sorry, I'm so weird.
No,
I just think vultures are neat.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.